enough information of late to know he was up to something. "Guardian!" Ariok bellowed. "You must stand!" "On whose authority?" Trinita asked as she kept backing toward the door. I believe there's been a slight mistake. We didn't realize that this was a haven for the clan. You must really mark your areas a lot better. Try to do it like a dog would. That way we could smell it." "Stand!" She cringed. She knew that according to the ancient rules, she was in their house, and that she now had to stand if called out. She knew that Ariok knew the rules of engagement and knew that she, as a guardian, was well aware of them. She turned to the other guardian. "Don't let them have her. Make sure she knows. No matter what, make sure she knows the sacrifices that were made for her." The other guardian hurt inside. He knew the rules as well, and he understood what Trinita was saying. He nodded and then looked out the doorway toward Eve. He saw that Eve had made it to the sidewalk across the street. She was able to be guarded without rules stopping them now. He looked back, and without a second thought, he let go of the trigger release on his bow. 2 accusers screamed as the abyss claimed them. His eyes met Trinita's, then the door closed upon his partner as he pursued after the one he was to guard. Trinita paused a second before she turned back to face her opponent. "Ja, your strength I need. Let her be worth this." With no further hesitation, she turned and screaming something out in Spanish, she rushed with sword flashing at Ariok. They say that a candle goes out in a church somewhere when an angel passes. Isaiah had tears streaming down his face as he had to relight every row of candles within his church. She had been one of the most courageous. Isaiah stood as he watched the newly relit candles flickering in the holders. His soul was hurting and sorrowful. It was hard enough when a mortal was lost, but when nothingness claimed a supernatural, it was a whole new kind of hurt. How can the emptiness that ensues be described when one who's not supposed to pass before a human passes? And for what? He knew that questioning Ja was human, but it never made it seem right. Yet, it was happening often lately. What was it that was bringing the Alliance into a struggle for this lady who, only a week ago, was simply an acquaintance of Alfonso's? Was there something that Alfonso knew that no one else knew? Leah had mentioned earlier that she had some information for all of them, but it would have to wait. She wanted to make sure that all of them were together when she revealed what she knew. All of them. That seemed ironic now. All of them wouldn't be there now, because one of them was no longer with them. Isaiah made his way down the center aisle of the auditorium as his eyes fell upon the cross that hung by wires as if floating above the platform. How much longer, Ja? How much longer must we suffer before the victory can be fully claimed against the fallen? How many more must fall prey? When will mankind realize the deception and the dangers of the clans? Isaiah didn't know the complete history. In fact, there were few who did. The Watchers were the ones who knew the most, but they all had been wiped out over the years by the fallen. Even then it seemed Ja just stood by. The biggest blow had come when Rasputin had been swayed by the fallen to be indwelt by a possessor because of his lust for power, and many of the Watchers' secrets had been revealed to the clans. They had used this to track down the members of the secret sect and kill them. Leah had shared a little in the helplessness that many of the Alliance network felt as they could not stop the tide of deaths. As the Watchers fell, so did much of the history of the Alliance, the fallen, and even the Nephelium. Also, many of the prophecies had been lost because only the Watchers knew where they were kept. Isaiah had been told of great, courageous stories throughout history on how the clans had been stopped by the joining of humans and angels, and how the soul lust of the clans had been prohibited from pouring out into the reality of mankind and kept at bay. Now, it was only talked about as myths, even though true. He sat down on the front row. It had just been the night before that he and Troy had sat in these pews talking, and Troy had told him of the guardians who were there protecting him. He wondered if there were any there tonight. At times he wished he was one, strong, noble, supernatural strength. But then again, nothing beat human either. As a human, he was able to experience human affection, human touch, feel what it meant to have a true free will. That was a big one. Eternals had some free will, but it was bound by their existence. The very essence of what they bound them many times to either do Jah's will or become a fallen. There were no real mercy or grace for them as there were extended to humans. He didn't think he would give that part up. If only they could put all the pieces together. The local alliance network had been watching Ariok for over a year now. Leah had actually had run-ins with this overlord a few times in the past century, but this time she said something was different. Never had she seen Ariok draw such a following of his clan. And then there was the vast subculture of familiars that were growing more and more. The Vortex seemed to be seething with those seeking for belonging, power, family, or all three. They had never been able to fully understand it all, and it had become tormenting to them. It was like having a large puzzle, fresh out of the box. One knew all the pieces were there, but they just didn't know how they all fit together. Now it seemed another piece was being added to the mix. Or was this young tattoo artist even a part of what had been taking place? It seemed that Ariok really didn't have an interest in her, or even knew she existed, but Leah sure was pushing for this young lady to be guarded. Eve leaned against the cold, dark brick of the building behind her as she looked down the street at the lights and activity that marked the entrance to the Vortex. What had happened in there? What had gotten into Megan? She had to stop and catch her breath. The evening showed no sign of rain like the evening before, and she knew that if the city lights were shining as a false facade of stars, that she would be able to see those that nature so eloquently set ablaze every night. She often wondered if life had just become too complicated. She remembered as a young girl hoping that she would grow up and go on an adventure that would allow her to see all kinds of things. But then those were silly dreams of a girl who was also trying to escape reality.